of an 1870s house true ghost story. Have you ever felt a sudden, inexplicable chill in a perfectly warm room? That a fleeting shadow in the corner of your eye was more than just a trick of the light? Tonight, we delve into the unsettling history of a sprawling 1870s farmhouse, a place where the echoes of a tragic past refuse to fade. This is not a tale spun from folklore. This is the bone-chilling true story of a family tormented by the spirits that linger within their walls. The first signs of haunting. Weeks into their stay, the phenomena escalated. The mundane rhythms of their new life began to fray at the edges, replaced by a subtle, creeping dread. It started with sounds, the soft, mournful creak of floorboards overhead when everyone was downstairs, or the faint, almost imperceptible scratching from within the walls. A sound that would cease the moment you tried to pinpoint its source. At first, they dismissed it as the house settling, the groans of old timber adjusting to the changing seasons. But the sounds grew more deliberate, more personal. One evening, while preparing dinner, the wife heard what sounded like a child humming a nursery rhyme from the empty hallway. She called out, thinking her daughter had come home early from a friend's house, but was met with only a profound and unsettling silence. The humming never returned, but its memory lingered, a ghostly echo in the quiet moments of the day. A few nights later, her husband was working late in his study when the heavy oak door, which always stuck, swung shut with a deafening slam, plunging the room into darkness. He found the latch was firmly engaged from the inside, a feat impossible to achieve from where he sat. The disturbances soon turned from auditory to visual. A shadow would flicker in the periphery of your vision, a dark shape darting just out of sight as you turned your head. More than once, family members would catch a reflection in a window or a polished surface or tall, gaunt figure standing behind them, only to whirl around and find nothing but empty space. The air in certain rooms grew heavy and cold, a stark, unnatural chill that clung to the skin and made the hairs on your arms stand on end, even as the rest of the house remained comfortably warm. This cold was not just a drop in temperature, it felt like a presence, a palpable void that seemed to absorb all warmth and light. One night, the teenage son awoke to the distinct feeling of being watched. He opened his eyes slowly, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. In the dim moonlight filtering through his window, he saw it, a dark form standing in the corner of his room, motionless and indistinct. It had no discernible features, just a humanoid outline that seemed to drink the light around it, a silhouette cut from a fabric darker than the surrounding shadows. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing it to be a dream, a trick of the exhausted mind. When he dared to look again, the corner was empty. The oppressive feeling, however, remained. A suffocating blanket of fear that did not lift until the first rays of dawn broke the horizon. These were no ordinary creaks or drafts. Something had taken root in the house, an unseen occupant that moved through its halls with a quiet, malevolent purpose. It was a silent observer, a patient hunter that seemed to draw strength from their mounting terror. The family, once happy and full of hope for their new home, now moved through their days with a shared, unspoken anxiety. They were no longer alone in the house, and the entity that shared their space was slowly making its presence undeniable, feeding off the fear of its residents. Shadows and apparitions. It began subtly, a flicker in the periphery, Silhouettes moved just out of sight in the corner of a room, along staircases, or behind partially drawn curtains. They didn't appear fully. Their presence was felt, oppressive and undeniable. The house, once a sanctuary, was slowly becoming a stage for these silent, formless watchers. The first resident to report the phenomenon was a young artist named Leo. He'd moved into the old Victorian home seeking inspiration in its historic charm. Instead, he found a creeping dread that seeped from the woodwork. He'd be sketching late into the night, the only light coming from his desk lamp, when a tall, slender shadow would glide across the far wall, independent of any object that could cast it. It made no sound, but the silence it left in its wake was deafening, filled with a palpable tension. Leo started leaving all the lights on, a futile attempt to banish the darkness that seemed to have a life of its own. On one particularly cold night, a tenant witnessed a figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was a woman named Clara who had rented the upstairs bedroom. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, but the room's temperature dropped drastically. She felt a crushing weight on her chest, and for a moment, she thought she might never breathe again. Frozen in terror, she could only stare at the tall, stooped silhouette. It seemed to lean forward, its featureless head tilting as if studying her. The paralysis held her captive until the first rays of dawn pierced the window, and the figure simply dissolved into the growing light. She packed her bags and left that very morning, never to return. The apparitions were not confined to the bedrooms. A family renting the ground floor spoke of seeing a small child's shadow darting down the main hallway. They'd hear the faint sound of giggling, followed by the pitter-patter of tiny unseen feet running on the hardwood floors. On several occasions, the father, Mark, would chase after the sound, only to find the hallway empty. A child's toy, small, wooden horse inexplicably placed in the center of the floor. They had no children of their own, and the toy had not been there moments before. The game felt sinister, a playful lure into something much darker. The hauntings escalated. The shadows grew bolder, no longer content to linger at the edges of vision. A student named Aisha was studying in the living room when the shadow of a large, hulking man fell over her textbook. She looked up, expecting her roommate, but the room was empty. The air grew thick and heavy, smelling of damp earth and decay. The shadow remained cast over her book for nearly a minute, a solid, unmoving patch of blackness that seemed to absorb the light around it. She felt a cold touch on her shoulder, a skeletal pressure that made her scream, and in an instant, both the shadow and the sensation were gone. The most terrifying account came from a paranormal investigator who agreed to spend a weekend in the house. Armed with cameras and audio recorders, he set up his equipment in the master bedroom, the epicenter of the reported activity. The first night was quiet, deceptively so. But on the second night, his equipment went haywire. The temperature plummeted below freezing, and his audio recorders picked up a low, guttural whisper, a string of words in a language he couldn't identify. Then, on camera, a swarm of shadow-like forms began to coalesce in the center of the room. They swirled and writhed like smoke, forming and unforming into vague humanoid shapes. He described a feeling of pure malevolence, an intelligence that was ancient and full of hate. The last image captured before the camera died was of a single, massive shadow detaching from the mass and lunging directly at the lens. The investigator fled, abandoning his gear, his face a mask of primal fear. He later said it wasn't just a haunting, it was an infestation. The shadows weren't just residual energy, they were entities waiting in the darkness for the next soul to torment. Discovering the house's history. Driven by a mixture of creeping dread and morbid fascination, the new homeowners began to dig into the old house's past. The local library's archive became their second home. Its silence a stark contrast to the unsettling quiet of their own residence. Their search began with the deed, a brittle document that listed a chain of ownership stretching back to the house's construction in the 1870s. As they delved deeper into microfilmed newspapers and dusty town records, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. A series of misfortunes and tragedies seemed to cling to the property like a stubborn, insidious ivy. Each story adding a new layer to the oppressive atmosphere they had come to know so well. They discovered the original owner, a prosperous merchant named Silas Croft, had lost his fortune and his mind within the home's first decade, ending his own life in the attic. The house then passed to his estranged sister, Ilara, a recluse who, according to town gossip from the 1890s, was never seen outside its walls again after moving in. She was found years later, having passed away in her sleep. Though the undertaker's private journal noted she looked as if she had been frightened to death. The early 1900s brought a family with young children, but their laughter was short-lived. A yellowed newspaper article from 1908 reported the tragic drowning of their youngest son in the backyard. Well, an accident that splintered the family and led to their abrupt departure. It seemed as though the house itself had a malevolent hunger, feeding on the happiness and stability of those who dared to call it home. The litany of sorrow continued through the decades. There were whispers of a soldier who returned from the Great War, not with shell shock, but with a shadow that followed him from the house's dark corners until he vanished entirely in the winter of 1922. A couple in the 1950s, a story pieced together from hushed obituaries and court documents, was plagued by a violent, unexplainable turn in the husband's temperament, culminating in a grim domestic dispute that left the wife institutionalized and the husband deceased under suspicious circumstances. Each new finding felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place, forming a picture of relentless, generational suffering. The cold spots, the disembodied whispers, the fleeting movements in their peripheral vision, they were not just figments of their imagination. They were echoes, trapped and replaying a cycle of pain. One particular set of police reports from 1974 detailed the experiences of the last family to live there for any significant length of time. They had called the authorities repeatedly, complaining of objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut in empty hallways, and a child's laughter echoing from the basement. The most chilling account was a description of a tall, thin figure that would stand motionless in the master bedroom doorway, a silhouette of pure blackness that seemed to absorb the very light around it. This was the same room where they had seen the shadow, the same doorway where they often felt an inexplicable cold. The police had dismissed the claims as a prank or a cry for attention. The family abandoned the house and most of their possessions. Less than 6 months later, it became clear that the house had not just witnessed these tragedies. It had absorbed the anguish and despair of its residents, refusing to ever let them go. grew more aggressive. What had begun as subtle whispers and fleeting shadows now took on a malevolent and physical form, turning the historic 1870s house into a prison of fear. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, a heavy oak door at the end of the hallway slammed shut with a deafening crack, the force so great it splintered the antique wood of the frame. The sound was like a gunshot, a violent declaration that they were no longer welcome. This wasn't the wind or a draft. It was a deliberate act of intimidation, a warning of what was to come. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an unseen energy that left the family breathless and paralyzed by a new, more profound terror. This single event marked a turning point. The once passive presence was now actively hostile, without cause, launched across rooms with startling velocity. A porcelain doll, a relic from the original owners, was hurled from its mantelpiece, perch shattering into 1,000 pieces on the hearth. Family photographs were found turned to face the wall, their glass frames cracked. Distant footsteps echoed through the halls even when the house was empty, their rhythm slow and deliberate, pacing the upper floorboards as if an unseen sentinel was keeping watch. The sound of a child's mournful crying would drift down from the attic in the dead of night, a sorrowful lament that seemed to seep into the very walls of the home, leaving a residue of deep sadness and despair. The family pets, once content and playful, became barometers of the escalating dread. The family dog, a loyal golden retriever, refused to enter the master bedroom, standing at the threshold with its hackles raised, growling at an invisible threat only it could perceive. The cat would often hiss at empty corners, its body arched and its fur on end, before bolting from the room as if pursued. Their instinctual fear was a constant, unnerving reminder that they were sharing their home with something unnatural, something that the animals recognized as a predator. The atmosphere was no longer just eerie, it was oppressive, a suffocating blanket of malice that drained the warmth and life from every room. It was clear the entities were aware of the residents' presence, their movements, even their emotions. Fear only seemed to strengthen the haunting. The more the family grew afraid, the more brazen the activity became. Whispers evolved into distinct guttural words spoken just at the edge of hearing, taunting them with their own names. Cold spots moved through the house like living things, enveloping a person for a moment before dissipating, leaving behind a chilling sensation and the lingering scent of damp earth and decay. The haunting had ceased to be a collection of strange occurrences. It had become a calculated psychological assault, feeding on their terror and growing more powerful with every scream, every sleepless night, and every prayer that went unanswered. The house was no longer their home. It was a stage for a relentless and terrifying performance, and they were the unwilling audience. The final night. The old house, a relic from the 1870s, had always held a certain chill, but nothing could have prepared the family for what was to come. For months, the disturbances had been small, almost dismissible. A misplaced object, a whisper on the edge of hearing, a fleeting shadow glimpsed from the corner of an eye. The children spoke of a woman in a long dark dress who watched them from the end of the hallway, her face obscured by shadows. The parents had tried to rationalize it, blaming drafts, old floorboards, and the overactive imaginations of their young ones. But as autumn's grip tightened, the house's malevolence grew, its patience wearing thin. The cold began to seep not just through the window panes, but from the very walls themselves. It was a damp, profound cold that no fire could warm, clinging to the air like a shroud. The whispering grew bolder, twisting into distinct, mournful words that seemed to coil in the darkness just beyond the light. The scent of decaying flowers would waft through the rooms at odd hours, a cloying sweetness that turned the stomach. Doors, once merely creaking, now slammed shut with violent finality, their echoes reverberating through the heavy silence that followed. The family started sleeping in one room, huddled together for a warmth that was more than physical, seeking solace in shared fear. The culmination came on a stormy evening. Thunder rattled the windows as a relentless, driving wind howled around the house like a starving beast. The air inside crackled with an unseen energy, heavy and oppressive, making each breath feel stolen. The faint, rhythmic tapping that had recently started from within the walls grew louder, more frantic, like a desperate message from a tomb. Suddenly, every light in the house extinguished at once, plunging them into a suffocating, absolute darkness. A child's scream was swallowed by a deafening crash from the parlor, the sound of shattered glass and splintered wood. In the disorienting blackness, a low, guttural moan began to rise from the floorboards beneath them. It was a sound of profound agony, a wretched sound that seemed to vibrate through their bones. The cellar door, which had always been locked and barred with a heavy iron bolt, burst open with terrifying force, its splintered frame crashing against the hallway wall. From the gaping maw of the cellar, an inky blackness began to pour out, not just an absence of light, but a tangible substance that chilled the skin and choked the air. A shadow moved across the walls, a formless, sprawling presence larger than ever before, its edges flickering as if made of black flame. Terrified, the tenants packed what they could in the panicked moments that followed, their hands shaking in the dim moonlight that finally pierced the clouds and left, never to return. The house stands to this day, silent and empty, but those who pass by swear that at night, faint lights flicker in the upstairs windows, doors creak open and slam shut on windless evenings, and shadowy figures move behind the glass, forever trapped within the memory of that final, horrifying night. The house on Elmwood Avenue remains a testament to the unknown. Its walls hold memories of sorrow, fear, and tragedy. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, one thing is certain: some places are not meant for the living. The chilling events that transpired within that 1870s structure serve as a stark reminder that the veil between our world and the next is sometimes terrifyingly thin. For over a century, the echoes of the past have refused to fade, leaving an indelible stain of cold dread upon the property and anyone who dares to cross its threshold. The stories passed down through generations are not mere folklore. They are warnings etched into the very fabric of the town's history, whispering of a presence that never left. The tale of the Elmwood House is more than just a ghost story. It is a chronicle of human suffering that has seeped into the very foundations of the building. The initial joy of the first family, the Harrisons, was tragically cut short, replaced by a grief so profound that it became a palpable force within the home. The loss of their youngest child, little Clara, was not the end of the tragedy, but the beginning of the haunting. Her laughter, once a sound of pure happiness, became a phantom melody that would drift through the halls at the dead of night, a sorrowful echo of a life taken too soon. Subsequent residents reported hearing the soft pitter-patter of small feet on the upper floor, a sound that would invariably be followed by a sudden, bone-chilling drop in temperature. It was as if Clara's spirit was forever searching for the warmth of her family, her innocent confusion twisting into a source of unending terror for those who followed. As the years marched on, the house's reputation grew darker. Each new family that attempted to make a home within its walls was met with escalating paranormal activity. Doors would slam shut with violent force, objects would be hurled across rooms by an unseen hand, and disembodied whispers would snake their way from the shadows, speaking names of people long dead. The initial, almost mournful presence of Clara seemed to give way to something more sinister, something resentful of the living. Perhaps the cumulative misery of each family's departure fed the entity, strengthening its hold on the physical world. Or perhaps another spirit, one far less innocent than a lost child, had been drawn to the nexus of sorrow that the house had become. The chilling apparition of a tall, gaunt man seen lurking in the cellar became a recurring nightmare, his dark eyes filled with a malevolence that promised more than just a scare. The house was eventually abandoned, left to decay under the weight of its own dark history. For decades, it stood as a dare for local teenagers and a subject of fascination for paranormal investigators, each visitor adding their own chapter of fear to its legend. Every investigation team that spent a night within its decaying walls left with terrifying evidence. Electronic voice phenomena capturing clear, threatening messages. Full-bodied apparitions appearing on camera for mere seconds before vanishing, and team members reporting being physically pushed, scratched, and choked by an invisible force. The house on Elmwood Avenue was no longer just haunted. It had become a hostile entity, a predator cloaked in wood and plaster, jealously guarding its domain of tragedy and refusing to let the past die. It stands today, not as a home, but as a monument to the despair it has collected. A place where the line between history and horror has been erased forever. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows, share your thoughts below. And remember, some stories are better heard with the lights on.